Hello, everybody. Mr. Viteri here again with another lecture. We are covering day 3 of Unit 8, and I want to bounce up to this. We've seen this picture before, but I added a learning objective from the CED. And so this is an example of litter pollution. Litter pollution can cause blockages, intestinal blockages. Not that I like that, but I like those words that can be used in, let's say, a free response question. Okay, they cause choking hazards. They can introduce toxic chemicals which may lead to death. And these are, of course, sad pictures. You could elaborate on them by saying birds will eat these plastic products because they think they're food. They end up becoming lodged in their intestine and cause a blockage, preventing them to eat proper food and eventually starve and die. And in this picture, in this seal cup, you can say that some plastics wrap around the necks. I know six packs are sometimes held together by a plastic wrapping, and if that goes into the water, it's a perfect hole for birds, and they could also get caught in their necks. So, yes, this is an example. Litter pollution is an example of one of the objectives in our CED. Let's continue. So I'm going to skip forward back to where we were, and we are going to talk about the valuable wetlands. And there are wetlands in general, particularly focus on a mangrove. And mangroves are a particular type of wetland. Specifically, what differentiates wetlands from a mangrove, like a mangrove forest is in a wetland, but a wetland could be all different. So that's like a huger umbrella, and the mangroves are a smaller segment of that umbrella. Now, the mangrove forest are these beautiful trees that they reach their roots in the water. And I want you to imagine if you were a fish, if you were a frog, that this is protection. This is it's going to stop the tremendous current, if you will. It's protection. You won't be in the sun. You could be in the shadow, and you can keep cool. This is protection from bigger organisms that can't necessarily fit in those smaller mangroves. So this is an ideal place to raise young. Okay, they are under attack. What are they under attack for? They're under attack, and I'm on this third objective over here for commercial development. Who does not want to live next to the water? And I mean, that's the dream, a nice lake house. But as we develop more and more waterfront properties, we're destroying our wetlands. Okay, so they're under attack by commercial development, dam construction, because we want to be able to control that water. Perhaps we're going to use hydroelectric power. Overfishing, since they're close to shore, they're easy to get to, so they are also under attack by overfishing. And of course, that pollutants that we've been talking about, like excess fertilizer or sewage runoff, and that can cause eutrophication in these areas as well. So they are under attack. They the wetlands, aka the mangroves, they provide so many service functions for us, and those are going to include flood protection. Why is it flood protection? Well, they're going to absorb a lot of that water. Okay, that, let's say if the ocean or the river is surging, the wetlands are going to be able to absorb that water. But if we built a house right there, then when the river surges or when the ocean surges, then you're going to have flooding. Downtown Jersey City, perfect example. A lot of flooding. Seawarren during Hurricane Sandy, Superstorm Sandy. A lot of flooding occurs. So this is like a buffer area that will absorb excess flooding and that we would not construct on. Now, it's also going to provide water filtration. So it's going to, now when it rains, it's going to take a lot of those excess amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium as water goes through it. It's going to absorb a lot of those excess pollutants that otherwise would have gone into the river, otherwise would have gone into a pond, otherwise would have gone into the ocean. So it's a water purification system. And all around habitat and nurseries, like we've spoken before. So wetlands are very, very important. I'll be going on a nature walk and it's actually supplied by Woodbridge Township. If you register for their website, they're going to be doing a bat walk, which bats typically live near water, freshwater ecosystems. And there's also a bird watch, and it's very exciting. It's in June. But why? Why? Because there's going to be plenty of birds. Because in the spring in New Jersey, there's you know there's plenty of food, a lot of flowers, a lot of little berries, a lot of insects, and the birds come over here, and so it springs life. Okay, and so a nice little walk will be nice to see these organisms um, in that area. That's going to happen at Oros Wetlands Preserve, and it's a really nice area. You should look it up. Like I said before, mangroves are under attack. Uh, Now, specifically, if you click on here, you'll see that mangroves are particularly under attack because they're a great place to raise shrimp. And if you see this area over here, it's a huge wetland. And what they have made is subsections of like ponds. And these are shrimp farms. And these shrimp farms, now you've cut down the trees and made these places, and an area that once was supposed to absorb NPK is now probably producing a lot of NPK because you're going to be producing a lot of shrimp, high concentration of shrimp in relatively small area, and you're going to be pumping them full of food, and so they're going to be eating, they're going to be pooping, they're going to be producing, they're going to be defecating, and that's going to produce a lot of excess NPK, and that's probably going to get washed over into either if that's a river or if that is going to be the ocean itself. So they are under attack from construction and shrimp farming. Now we talk about construction because if you're going to build a resort, where are you going to build a resort? You're building it right next to a water. You're building it right next to the water. Okay, and so they're under attack. And that's going to be causing an issue. Construction is a big thing. We're going to come back to that in a minute. Now, they do help with flooding, like we spoke of before. And since they are so productive, meaning that they have a lot of green things that are growing there, plants and trees, and they significantly help reduce CO2 concentrations, which is associated with the greenhouse effect and climate change. Okay, so we need to save these mangroves. Let's continue. So uh, we've spoken of eutrophication before. I had a great brave student that told me she does not really understand it, and I wanted to tell her it's like you can't tell someone play the guitar. You have to break it into a couple of different pieces. And eutrophication is not just one thing that you have to answer. It's a combination of things that ultimately produce what we call dead zones. Okay. Now, what's a dead zone? It's an area where there's no dissolved oxygen. You have to understand the concept of dissolved oxygen. So, in a body of water, whether it's salt water or fresh water, there's a majority of H2O molecules floating around, but there's also O2 molecules inside the water. That is the dissolved oxygen. How does that dissolved oxygen get in there? Well, from the surface area, just through diffusion, some of that oxygen through wave action is going to diffuse into the water. CO2 is also diffusing into the water. Okay. There has to be at least, well, it depends on that organism, but typically a healthy amount of dissolved oxygen, well, let's just say it's about 5 to 8. Okay. It could get much higher than that. It could get lower than that. But 5 to 8, let's say a majority of fish are going to be able to survive. All right. Okay, so if it's lower than 5, now we're going to start seeing some organisms either swim away or they're going to suffocate and die. If it's at 1 or 2, you got like widespread death. Okay, let's try to understand this and explain this process. Once again, it's available on YouTube. I've explained it. If you're still lost, please ask. So there's going to be a lot of NPK. I like to say that, and I've told it to you. Student actually didn't know what NPK was. Hopefully, you do know what I'm using, the chemical symbols for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The key components, the limiting factors in plant growth. Okay, and in that order, nitrogen and phosphorus. Those are the two big ones. Nitrogen over phosphorus, then potassium. Okay. So a lot of nitrogen from phosphorus and potassium are going to go into a body of water. How can that happen? Well, that could happen by, um, you know, fertilizer runoff from farms. People put fertilizers on their grass. Golf courses are going to provide a lot of fertilizer because they want to keep their grass perfect. So sewage has a lot of NPK in it. Okay, human run sewage, dog poop, a farm that has animals. Okay, CAFOs, that's going to have a lot of NPK. So right there, that's a lot of nutrients going to a body of water. It could go into a river, it could go into the ocean. When all those nutrients go into the water, the plant that can reproduce the fastest, it's not really a plant, but the photosynthetic organism that can reproduce the fastest is typically algae that are in the water. So now algae got an enormous amount of food. What do you think they're going to do? Specifically in the summertime when the water starts to warm up, they're going to reproduce like crazy. They could probably reproduce within an hour, so they could double. And so within a 24-hour period, you can imagine how many algae are going to be there. Okay. Sooner or later, the whole top of the water is covered in what we call algae blooms. Okay. Now, once you get that thick layer and sunlight cannot penetrate, the plants that are in the bottom of the ocean start to die, or bottom of the water area start to die. Okay, that's important. Understand that. The algae that's on the bottom also start to die. Things that are dead start to decompose. Well, who does the decomposition? Bacteria do the decomposition. All right, now hear me out. The bigger you are, the more oxygen you need. It makes sense. But now we have a bazillion bacteria reproducing even faster, maybe within an hour, maybe within 15 minutes. They're going to start reproducing like crazy. And as they're reproducing and going through respiration, they're going to be using up all of the dissolved oxygen that's in the water. So now, since they're dissolving, they're using all the dissolved oxygen. Dissolved oxygen goes down. BOD goes up. What is BOD? Biochemical oxygen demand. That goes up because now there's more of a demand for oxygen by these microbes. As they start to decompose all this dead material, more and more DO goes down, and the organisms that need oxygen, aka fish, aka any type of aquatic organism, basically we all use oxygen, even if it's dissolved oxygen, which is not, humans are not made to absorb dissolved oxygen. We take it from the air. Those things start to die. The bacteria even have more food, so it just basically causes a positive feedback loop. And sooner or later, you have very little dissolved oxygen, or next to none. Everything is dead. That's why it's called a dead zone. Okay. You can rewind this, stop this, replay it, ask questions in class. All right. Okay. Now let's look at some eutrophication vocabulary. Eutrophication, all right, is going to happen in an area. All right. Naturally, it can take up to hundreds of years. Now, how could it naturally happen? Let's say leaves run off from a forest and go into a body of water. That can happen, and over 1,000 years, 100 years, you can get a place that becomes eutrophic. But cultural eutrophication, now we're just getting more specific, meaning caused by humans. That's typically going to be caused by urban runoff, industrial discharges, fertilizers, erosion, sewers, and that's going to cause this. All right. We call eutrophication when the algae grows on top, algae blooms. We could also call it HAAs, HABs, harmful algae blooms. And that's going to be a different type of algae, but usually caused by an influx of NPK. That just means it's harmful to us. If we go in that water, we can get sick. Anyhow, algae blooms. Hypoxic zones or hypoxia is going to be indication of low DO or very low DO, that you can't live in that area no more. An oligotrophic lake is going to be the opposite. It's going to be an area that does not have a lot of nutrients. You have high DO, stable algae populations. Okay. Microbes, once again, use all the dissolved oxygen. They have a higher affinity for oxygen than we do. We need it around, big fish need it around, let's say 7. But meanwhile, these microbes can live at 1, live at next to none. All right. And they're taking up all of the excess dissolved oxygen. All right, let's continue. So here, some of those algae blooms that are forming. Oh, this poor frog, he's just smothered in it. Look at this. This is disgusting. Okay. And sooner or later, maybe 1 or 2 days, this can be completely covered. Look at the water. It is extremely turbid. Sunlight cannot penetrate this. And so therefore, all the plants on the bottom are going to start to die. Fish can't see each other. Predators can't see their prey. Fish are going to start to die. Now, this is going to smell. Bacteria are going to then decompose it. and then they're going to even use more dissolved oxygen. Okay, and it's just basically a feedback system in that. All right. Okay. So that's all about eutrophication. I'm contemplating going through one more slide. Let's complete this. Okay. Because they're kind of correlated. All right. First of all, eutrophication usually occurs in the summer. Maybe it's because we're taking in Jersey or in every areas where it's hotter. There's a correlation between temperature and dissolved oxygen. Let's get that. Okay, let's get that in our head. And this is one of the CEDs. So as temperature goes up, there's typically lower dissolved oxygen. It's kind of weird. Cold water has more dissolved oxygen. This is kind of makes sense because big sharks, they're typically not in warmer waters. They're going to be in the cold waters. The great whites are going to be in cold waters. The tiger sharks in Australia are typically in colder waters, deeper waters. Doesn't mean like a bull shark can't go into the shallow waters, but big fish are going to need high dissolved oxygen. Okay, and so understand that in warmer temperatures or in the summertime in Jersey, that's when the yo goes lower, and that's when you'll get in our bay, you'll get a lot of fish kills, and you see all those dead bunker, aka Manhattan, all floating up to the top. All right, we're gonna end it right there. You were an amazing class. Hopefully, you learned something and ask any questions in class. I'll talk to you later.